Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and give everybody a few seconds to get logged in and get their audio working. So just bear with us for just a moment here. Thanks. All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kate Krause. I'm the Senior Director for Alumni Relations at the School of Engineering for UConn. I'm so happy to be here today to discuss with you guys an incredibly important and sometimes underappreciated topic of discussion, financial literacy. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues, Josh Prue, Samantha Morris-Avery, and Kristen Luger. Together, we have been your go-tos for all things career-related in the virtual space, and we are absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We'd like to welcome you to the 2022 iteration of our annual month of career and professional development. Many of you may know about or have participated in our virtual career hack series that we host throughout the calendar year. We do this under the same brand, but in February, we pause to focus on all things career related and bring you a slate of incredible offerings designed to help you bolster your next step in your career journey. This is year 5 of the series. We've seen some fantastic speakers. Today is absolutely no exception as we kick off number 2 of the 7 events scheduled for this month. Just so that you know, still coming up, we have everything from a conversation with a director in Marvel Studios, now Warner Brothers, to sessions with for entrepreneurs with the Connecticut Small Business Development Center and more. So please make sure to take a look at our other sessions and continue to join us this month. Also, don't forget that you can find the recordings for all of our sessions on the YouTube channel and catch up on anything that you may have missed or aren't able to attend. So back to today, financial literacy, all the time, but especially in a rapidly changing professional world and shifting economic landscape, having a solid grasp on the core elements of financial wellness are absolutely crucial. So today we're lucky to have some outstanding alumni and friends of UConn sharing their expertise about some of the common elements of financial literacy that we encounter during many phases of our lives in professional development. And they're going to talk to us a little bit about how we can leverage those into our own successes. So before I turn it over to our panelists, I do want to review just some of our housekeeping items to help you manage your participation today. First, closed captioning is available. So should you wish to utilize this service, please visit your toolbar, select the CC option and activate your subtitles. My colleagues will also be dropping these instructions into the chat in just a moment, so you should see it there as well. Speaking of chat, the chat option is open, so please feel free to drop in where you're logging in from, opportunity to engage with your fellow alumni, get some discussions going and network. We just ask you to remember to be kind, courteous, and supportive in all of your dialogue. And then next, should you have questions for our panelists, we're asking that you utilize the Q&A section on your Zoom toolbar. This will help our panelists keep their questions in order in kind of a centralized area. If you drop it into the chat by accident, no worries. Someone from our team will ask you or remind you to put that back into the Q&A section to ensure that we get to as many questions as we can. Finally, today's session is being recorded. So if you need to jump off early or if you have another conflict, we will be able to share this recording with you in our follow-up communications, and it will also live on our YouTube channel. So that being said, let's go ahead and meet our speakers. So first, a veteran of our Elevate series, John Brady. John, or JB, is an executive coach, a keynote speaker, and a media source on matters related to corporate and career performance. Mr. Brady's clients can be found throughout the United States and Western Europe in mid-market and Fortune 500 companies, as well as government and large nonprofits. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in English education, a Master of Education degree in Leadership, Training, and Policy Studies, both from Wheelock College of Education and Human Development at Boston University, and a Master's of Business Administration with concentrations in Marketing, International Business from the Olin Graduate School and Babson College. So thank you guys so much. That's a lot of information to throw at you, but we're thrilled that you're all here. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us your expertise today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and drop off and hand it over to you, John. Thanks.
Kate, thanks so much. And thanks to everybody on the UConn staff behind the scenes who make these things possible. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, wherever you're joining us from, Husky family and friends. We have a great topic and great setup for you this evening. We've spent this afternoon, I guess, for most of you. So it looks like most of you are on the East Coast from the registrations. We have a great panel and great content for you today. Most people are very surprised when they come to me for career help, making a transition, making a change, or just figuring out how to best navigate and make their way through to their next great opportunity. That I often bring up matters of finance beyond just salary and compensation. Most of us hopefully have things that we'd like to do, places we'd like to be with regard to our financial wherewithal and resources. And it's nice when those things meet up and come together for some, in some logical way. And for whatever reason, people tend to not put those two things together. And I think it's great that the alumni who have provided input and the alumni staff have sought to bring two seminal experts in the space to join us for our panel today. One disclaimer that I do have, keep in mind, this is meant to be a broad educational and informative dialogue and bit of information sharing. So our guests just aren't in a position in this medium to be sharing advice about individual investment products or very specific investment, financial, or other situational information. Those are things that are definitely best handled offline, but we're gonna still talk about a whole host of topics that I think are directly relevant to just about everybody, regardless of where you are on life's timeline or on your career timeline with our brief period together today. So thanks again for joining us. Before I begin, I'm going to let our panelists go ahead and introduce themselves. Omar, if you feel comfortable doing so, can I start with you, and then we'll jump into content after you and Eric do your intros?
Sure, of course. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. My name is Omar Dinar. I graduated from UConn in 2002, almost hitting 20 years now for me, which seems like a few days ago. Graduated in a joint program from the Business and Engineering School. Spent about first 4 years of my career actually as an engineer at Sikorsky Aircraft. Did a master's degree in finance at Fairfield University, followed by an MBA at Fordham University. Moved over into financial services in 2008, just before the crisis. Spent about 11 years working in the broker-dealer investment banking world in Manhattan before pivoting into wealth management in 2019, where I'm currently at now at Merrill Lynch. I reside in Fairfield, married to my wife, Melissa, who's also a UConn grad, and we have hopefully a future UConn grad who's now 2 years old with my son, Anthony. So we're looking forward to today.
Thanks, Omar. Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Judge. I'm also a UConn alum, graduated in '87 with the undergraduate degree in finance. It was so much fun. I decided to go back a few years later and get my MBA, also concentrating in finance. I've spent decades in finance, in the various aspects from banking to insurance, retirement plans. I made a transition 8 years ago. Instead of helping financial advisors with clients from the home office, to actually take all of my skills and share them with families and businesses. The household is full of alums, so we bleed blue all the way. So looking forward to this great discussion and working with Omar and John as the moderator.
Gentlemen, thanks so much. And thanks again for being with us today. These aren't easy to find time for, especially when you consider all the preparation and follow-up. So on behalf of the entire UConn family, I know everybody is super grateful. And with that, people joined us to dive right in. So that's what we're going to do. A reminder, I know Kate mentioned this at the beginning, please take advantage of the chat and the Q&A windows. We try to get to every question. We can't always. Sometimes we'll blend those questions together, but in the background, we're trying to sort that stuff as best we can. But make use of those while I'm going to try and kick things off here and get everybody's brains moving in the right direction. This is really about you and for you. So try to take advantage of the medium and of our guest time as best you can. And we will do on our side everything we can to get to as many topics as possible in the brief period that we've got. Now, as far as I guess a kickoff and sort of stage setting, in an ideal world, of course, we'd all get the perfect job right out of school in our chosen career area or wherever we would like to start our career. We'd start investing and saving and making all sorts of wonderful financial choices along the way. But usually life is just not a straight line like that. I know it's jagged, certainly was for me. Sometimes it can take a while to get that first quote unquote real job, as some people might call it. A lot of people complete their undergrad or their graduate degree with a certain amount of debt from, it could be student loan debt, but also other areas of life as well, depending on where you are and when you're finishing. And life's expensive, car loans and mortgages, the stuff comes at us pretty fast. And while it would be nice to start optimizing, all of the retirement benefits from an employer right away, engaging in a sort of risk-adjusted savings and investment plan over the course of 30 or 40 years, with all the job changes that we make, with the career lattice as opposed to career ladder that most of us know, where salaries might go up and down, or we make changes or sometimes take a step back in order to go forward. Things don't necessarily go according to plan, and generationally different things have hit us, of course. So whether somebody's a Gen Z, a Gen X like me, or even a baby boomer, how much, if at all, has the model that folks like me were hearing about financial planning for our lifetime changed in, I don't know, the last 20 years or so? And if it's okay, Omar, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Thank you for that, John. It's a great question. I think conceptually, the same type of, the same mindset should be held, whether it was 20 years ago or now. It's, I think it's a matter of trying to balance priorities. And the way we do that is by setting various goals. We all have financial goals, whether it's short, medium, and long term. And I like to think of it in those very broad 3 buckets. And then you start building out certain strategies or plans on how do you meet those short, medium, and long-term goals. And obviously you help try to prioritize them. So, we would all love to maximize our 401ks or our IRAs. And like what you said, perhaps it's not possible in certain years or depending on circumstance. But I think having those goals set and prioritized, and then just trying to build a strategy or a plan to help meet each one of those is extremely valuable. Now, obviously, 30 years ago, the investment landscape is drastically different to where it's at now. When I first joined Merrill Lynch in 2019, I was speaking with one of our longest tenured advisors there, who's there since the 1980s, and he would tell me how he would pitch money market funds that would yield an 8% yield. For those of you that don't know, that's about 1/100th of what it is now. So it's very different landscape on what you would be investing, and also the amount of financial innovation that has happened over the last 20, 30, 40 years has been incredible. So there's an enormous amount of investment options available, regardless of dollar amount. So I think that's just something as well, is that there is such a low barrier to go in and to start investing and to start building that wealth, and to be able to do it as soon as possible is extremely important.
Eric, anything to add as far as how, the model and thinking may be different from what a lot of us either suspect or may have been advised when our careers started?
So Omar did a great job. I love everything he said. But what I would add and say, the model hasn't changed, but I think in terms of different aspects that should be emphasized. And so what am I getting at? We've all heard that it's important to have emergency money. I think this is heightened for those younger alums starting out. You no longer have the career path of yesteryear, where you're going to work for a certain company for such a long period of time. So I think building up those cash reserves has become much more important than it might have been for prior generation. And I would say with that, the beauty of this for people who may follow this is that they're going to have more flexibility. One of the reasons I was able to go back to school to get my master's after 2 years of working was my lifestyle and building up cash reserves. I went back full time on my own dime. And I think for the younger people and them really seeking out more meaning than I think prior other generations have, this will be fundamental to them really being able to follow their dreams.
That can be so difficult too, right? I think you're right. The importance of having liquidity to handle whatever emergency life throws your way, and you never know exactly how long that emergency is going to stretch, but it can seem really, really difficult. Those early salaries aren't always what you would hope they would be. And if you are facing a lot of debt, you've got, you're starting out making payments on things just in order to be, to have a vehicle to get to the job, assuming that you're not in a work from home situation or any one of a number of life circumstances that can hit. Are there things that you would advise people who are struggling to just even begin getting some savings set aside when it feels like there's just not a lot of room in the budget for very much, particularly in the early years, or when just going through a rough patch?
Absolutely. I think, for the profile that you're describing, this is where I think it's critical that people are really having a critical discussion with themselves. Lifestyle, are you just right out of school? You want to be independent. You want to have this place by yourself. Is that the right thing? You're in New York City, which is extremely expensive. Are you willing to sacrifice a few years where maybe you are having 3 or 4 roommates? Maybe not your ideal. So and this is no different than, and we can get there later, right? So this is one demographic we're talking to. The other demographic might be further along in their careers, and now they're merging with another person and building out this household, and discussions around who is providing income, whether they're going to start a family. I think one of the most important things I don't think people do enough of is actually the planning aspect. This is where Omar and myself help people. As you're starting these different stages in life, are you really thinking out all the different possibilities that are necessary to really ultimately get to your goal?
Yeah, absolutely. All I would add to that is, I was thinking the same thing around the planning, and 2 things that come to mind is, one is to try to make it as simple as possible. One way is there's a lot of very good budgeting tools that are available, whether it's through your local bank or online, where you could be able to very easily measure and track the amount of income that's coming in every month versus going out every month in the form of expense, and try to automate as much as possible these contributions. So you don't even have to think about it or remember, oh, I need to put aside $50 into my savings account every month. Well, just set up that monthly transfer, whether it's into your retirement account or your child's 529, and just so you don't even have to think about it. So it just becomes part of your routine, part of your budget.
When should people start talking to a professional, and how do they know what kind of professional to speak to depending on what they're facing, right? I think a lot of folks just naturally assume, well, if I don't have an existing nest egg, right, I'm not going to be talking to someone who normally is dealing in high net worth individuals and private banking, or they're not sure where to go, given there's so much information just at our fingertips and even in our pockets on our phones, right, about advice, which may or may not be very sound. But there's so many different inflection points, right? So who and when should I be looking for help? If I'm just starting my career, maybe I'm at mid-career and something's shifted, something's taken place, a divorce, right? We don't hopefully plan on that happening, right? But major changes happen. A parent gets really sick and is facing a long-term chronic illness, and suddenly there's financial support that's required there, or you're unable to work. COVID has impacted so many families that were on a path around dual income. And right now, because both child and elder care can be very difficult to find, their income picture is very different. because it's just not possible to go to the workplace when there's care that's needed to provide, that care that is needed in the home that they must provide. Any one of a number of different situations. How do you know who to look for and where to start?
So this is, thank you for this great question. I think a number of things come into play. As I kind of synthesize all the things you talked about, I'm led to have someone think about their time, knowledge, and interest in taking on these things by themselves. Having said that, if you are seeking professional advice, know that every advisor, every firm is very different. So if you think that you do need additional resources with that in a different ear, you need to actually interview. But I'll tell you, typically there are firms or individuals who do look at the resources of an individual, but there are many people who aren't, and they're looking for people who really respect their professional advice, who are willing to pay, and who are going to be engaged in the process and committed to it. So those are some of the things that I would definitely ask someone. But I love what you also said, John, about reevaluating whether in this particular stage, life is throwing different things at you. Do you continue doing what you've done in the past, or is this a good point to kind of step back, reevaluate, and maybe get another opinion?
And what I found is it depends. Certainly, I've encountered quite a number of people where perhaps initially they wanted to do their own investing. They started out, they opened up their own brokerage or their own IRA, and they started to accumulate funds and make their own decisions and do their own research, considering there's so much out there. But over time, as they get busier, they may not have the amount of time to be able to invest. As the dollar amounts start to increase over time, they may not feel comfortable with being able to invest such a large balance on their own, and then they would look for that professional guidance. And it's echoing what Eric said. It's a matter of finding that right fit for what company best suits your needs, what individual best suits your needs. If you establish a relationship with one of us, well, you're going to be working with us for not just days or weeks, but years, decades. Over time, we're going to be working with you every step of the way. Like as you touched on, John, life changes. I mean, there could be different circumstances. You could have children, moving, retiring, whatever the case is, good or bad. Things may need to get changed over time based off of that. So I think certainly if you have the desire to do it yourself, you certainly can. If you feel that that's not sufficient, that you need more, that's where, and you're willing to accept that guidance, which I certainly echo exactly what Eric had said, then that's where it makes sense to start having those conversations and trying to find that right individual to work with you.
As you're looking at different professionals in any one of a number of disciplines and giving financial advice, in rather broad strokes, what are the kinds of things that that people should look for? I mean, there's finding the right subject matter expertise, but there's also finding the right person for you, right? And what you're comfortable with, or people who might better understand the uniqueness of your situation in whatever way. If you were on the other side of this, right, what are some of the things that you would be asking of a professional in your space? Some of the things you might be listening for in a conversation? Just some of those things that are top of mind for either one of you.
Yeah, I would say, first off, I'd want to make sure if I was sitting on the other side of the desk and interviewing advisors, I'd want to make sure first off that they're a good listener. That they're going to hear what are all of my needs, where am I coming from, that investing is not a one size fits all. They're going to, and certainly it also helps to have that empathy, to be that empathetic, because there are going to be a lot of sensitive times in your life where you're going to be working with your advisor. I mean, there's very few things more sensitive than your life savings that you're helping to manage. Certainly around the expertise, some clients have very specific needs. So you may want to work with an advisor that caters to that very specifically. If you're a corporate executive, for example, and you need somebody to help manage your executive compensation, well, perhaps you'll work with an advisor who has a proven track record of that. Or if you're a doctor and they're working with doctors. So, you want to be able to, and ultimately finding that good fit. I mean, you have to want to work with and like that person to some extent, because you're going to be working with them, not just on a one-time basis, but over the long term.
Eric, anything to add there?
Yeah, I loved everything Omar shared, and I would add that also pay attention to how much time they have scheduled to actually meet with you. I think that could be very telling. And then make sure they're very transparent about how they get paid. I would also lastly add that as you're doing that, also, there are a lot of generic conversations. I think be willing to share a lot. Sometimes people are very cautious, but I would say that could actually lead to a mismatch, going to Omar's point about, if you're the executive or someone who really has this niche that needs a certain expertise because you have lots of options and stock concentration and things like that. So being very open about your situation and listening for that professional's response to that would be extremely important.
I rattled off just a handful of situations that popped into my mind, but there are others. The moment when you're taking on a mortgage, either to acquire a property or do a refinance or something, just anything that, not even necessarily anything negative or unexpected. We live in a world where there's self-service everything. And I think for most of us, we're just used to clicking a few buttons. I mean, now you can finance the acquisition of real estate or a vehicle or just about anything without having any interaction with a banker or a professional of any kind. And you may or may not know if that's the right product for you or just the best in general, but there's a lot of different kind of trigger moments, I suppose, right, that can happen in someone's life. At what point what are some of the triggers that I haven't mentioned that just from experience you've come across? I know, Omar, you just mentioned executive compensation, which is a great one. Certainly when the first time I know in my work, somebody is just negotiating executive compensation, usually I suggest they have an ERISA attorney or somebody helping them to understand the terms of whatever contract they're facing. But outside of that, that was one great example. But what are those inflection points, those trigger moments where somebody should say, "Wow, I should probably talk to somebody about this, whatever this is"?
I would say I am a huge believer in paying people for their expertise. And I'm going to take it out of the financial world and share two things. As an advisor, I've seen where this has backfired. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, I respect it. I always question the level to which you seek information and then become an expert yourself. And I unfortunately have experienced where a client had gone on the internet and gotten a power of attorney document and provided it to us. And once again, you don't know what you don't know. And so unfortunately, this person had completed it in such a way that they thought was sufficient for what they were trying to do. The document didn't put forth those releases that are needed so that they could act on behalf of a relative. And basically, when they needed money, because this relative ended up dying, but they had sought this out months before that was going to happen, because they knew it was going to happen. If they had just paid a couple $100s to an attorney, they would have been able to access the funds they needed to take care of all this person's financial matters. It did not happen. That money was not released for 6 months later. I'll share one more story, once again, outside of my world. I was going through a real estate transaction, and every time I do one, and I'm a real estate investor, long-term landlord with a portfolio, I pay for advice. I've done this enough. I could probably fill out the documents myself, but here's a great example of what happened. One of these did not go smoothly. And basically there was a lien on the property and the person selling it, their attorney missed it. Mine didn't. The benefit of this is I had access to this property free, probably for 3 months. It more than made up for whatever I paid the professional. So I'll leave people to think about that.
And to add
Sound
to
advice.
that, I would say that, you know, sometimes people wait until it's too late or until issues arise before seeking professional advice. And instead to be proactive and try to do it before that, you know, before you think you're looking to purchase a property, you know, start, if you can, a couple of years ahead of time, start working with that advisor to do that necessary planning, to go through. And, you know, everybody just thinks they're doing, you know, there's just a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Well, there isn't. There's actually a multitude of options out there depending on your circumstance and on your needs. And so that's where I think people like Eric and myself really come in, is we start providing, where we really add a lot of value is telling you about certain things that you don't know exist, and certain solutions that are out there that will work really well for you. And you know, without having that guidance, that professional guidance, you may miss out on that, which may cost you down the road, or make you not, or you're not making the best possible decision. So what I try to do is make sure that people are making the most informed decision possible, making so that they know what's out there that they may not know currently exists.
This is great advice. There is a question that came up, and I'm going to bring it up here because it just seems to fit. But somebody asked if there are specific credentials that are important in a financial advisor, certain certifications. You know, am I just looking for somebody with that financial advisor title? Is it important that somebody have a CFA? I mean, the list goes on for different disciplines within financial services. But what would your guidance be with regard to formal credentialing and other background?
You know, I think it depends on what you're looking for. I mean, there are advisors out there that have alphabet soup after their name in all the number of licenses and credentials that they have. Are those needed for your circumstance? You know, a CFA, for example, is a fantastic, very challenging certification to be able to get, but is it going to help with what you need? You know, it can or cannot, depending on the circumstance, really. So there are dozens of certifications out there that are available. You know, some of which, such as the CFP, is a very widely used designation that takes certain amount of years of service and passing exams to be able to do. But you know, I can't say that there's a one size fits all. The threshold to be an advisor, you know, you need to be able to, you know, there's minimum education requirements, but then it's really that you know, from there it's really, you know, up to what you're looking for. You may find that some advisors are very good around estate planning or around insurance or portfolio management or whatever the case is, and you may want to gear towards, you know, looking for people with those certain designations.
Are there other things that people ought to be doing in vetting somebody for help like this? I know when people come to me for the kind of services that I offer, certainly there's a lot of stuff out there about me already just in the public domain, but every now and again someone will want to talk to someone who's worked with me or whatever, and as long as, you know, former client is okay with it from a confidentiality standpoint, I don't mind putting people in touch. I usually just try to pair them up with somebody who's got a situation that's as close to theirs as I can approximate, so they can ask whatever questions they'd like. But are there other ways in which that, you know, somebody just trying to be a responsible consumer can vet the professional that they're considering working with?
Yeah.
No, please go ahead.
I'll offer two things. With our industry, as Omar had mentioned a few minutes ago, we have some basic credentialing that's needed in terms of licensing. If you go to Broker Check, you're able to see whether they actually hold proper licensing. and even in the state in which you are. I think that that's also helpful because if there's been an administrative action taken against them by one of the regulatory agencies, you would see it there, because we're a very highly regulated industry. People may not appreciate the extent to which that takes place. I also want to plant a couple of seeds. Going back a minute, you were saying some things that people should think about sitting across from the table. Most people coming to a financial advisor, you're dealing with maybe all the assets they have. And I'm not sure people actually put enough thought into what type of backing do you want an individual to have when they're dealing with your money. And one of the benefits I always joke with, Omar works for a large institution, and so do I, in terms of company. One of the benefits of that is it does give you some comfort. Things happen. You could start with Omar or myself. I always like to joke, if I'm hit by that, proverbial bus, there will be someone instantly to come in and help you and your family in that time of need. And I know Omar's firm works the same way. And I think as people have entrusted people with their life assets, sometimes there are some people and outfits, I don't think I'd give them all my money for those types of reasons. I hate to say it, but it's just the way I think. Having that backing of this larger firm with all their resources, even getting to Omar's great answer about, it does depend what you're looking for. But when you go to an organization that has the resources of the size firms that we have, if I'm not an expertise on some accounting matters, guess what? It's only a phone call away. That is the beauty of it.
Yeah,
Right.
and I think, Eric had mentioned was, 100% correct, was the broker check. That's a great resource to use. You can look up any one of us, anybody that has a securities license, you can do a name search there to look up their work history, any violations, complaints, anything like that. And this comes down to, something that we get asked a lot is, are we fiduciaries? And anybody, in my opinion, anybody could say they're a fiduciary. John, you could say you're a fiduciary, but who's holding you accountable for being a fiduciary? We have our companies are holding us accountable. FINRA is holding us accountable. The state of Connecticut is holding us accountable. Our professional associations are holding us accountable, where if we're not doing the right thing, we're being held accountable. And that's what I believe, actually makes somebody a fiduciary, is that you could be personally impacted by that. You could lose your securities licenses. You could be barred from the industry. So yeah, and to echo also with Eric, having, we each work for, some of the most reputable, names and brands in the industry, and have, there are those benefits when you can do everything all under one house, that there is that, you can easily make those introductions into anything that's outside of my expertise. We could certainly bring in a specialist to be able to help manage that, and that provides a lot of value to somebody who, that will have varying and differing needs over time.
Sure enough, we had talked about this in advance, and it came up. We knew the crypto thing was going to come up somewhere, right? And sure enough, it did. We were expecting that, but one of our audience members just in talking about cryptos, in this case, about a platform that allows them to set up a traditional IRA crypto portfolio. And without commenting on a product like that specifically, it is remarkable the number of investment vehicles that the average person now has access to, and the remarkable complexity behind some very straightforward marketing messaging. In all of this complexity, what just broad guidance do the two of you have? Because I am certain that your clients are coming to you with questions about these kinds of things all the time. I mean, we're getting pushed this stuff in Super Bowl ads and on our social media threads and everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have pretty often conversations regarding crypto, NFTs, digital assets in general. It's globally, it's a $3 trillion asset class. It's too big to ignore, even though since they're not regulated by the SEC. We can't house them in our accounts, but we certainly need to acknowledge and have a good understanding of what's out there. Now, whether it's suitable for you, what I go back to broadly is, to be able to determine suitability for an investment, you want to look at three broad factors. One is you want to look at your risk tolerance. Crypto, you could see are, some of them are very volatile, can move very significantly on a daily basis. Are you okay with dealing with that level of risk and seeing such big fluctuations in your account balance day over day? Some can, some can't. And there's varying aspects of that. How long do you intend to invest? Your time horizon, that'll dictate also whether if you need money 6 months from now, perhaps you're not going to be investing in something as volatile, and perhaps you'll be choosing something alternate. And lastly is the liquidity. And what do I mean by about liquidity is how easily can you convert that into cash? So most securities, especially the regulated securities, have very set dates on when you can sell and when what we call when those trades settle, once you have that cash on hand. So, is crypto, a good investment or not? Well, it depends on those factors. Just broadly speaking, I love the innovation that this industry has over the years. You see, you look over the last 40 years or so, the amount of evolution and different financial products that have come out. Sometimes it takes some time for those markets and those products to mature. But it'll be really interesting to see over these upcoming years, especially that underlying blockchain technology to me is extremely valuable, and it'd be really great to see how that gets implemented in a variety of ways.
Eric, anything to add to that kind of, I think, foundational evaluation that Omar was talking about? Because I think that's perfect regardless of the vehicle. Right now, crypto and NFTs, these are all hot topics, but you mentioned yourself having real estate holdings. If I'm thinking about investment properties, right, I think people sometimes forget how much risk can be associated even in the real estate market. While 2008 had its own flavor, COVID-19 had its own flavor. I mean, we tend to think of it's real estate investment trusts, sort of these nameless, faceless things, but a lot of people who own property, both residential and commercial, may just have a couple of holdings or even only just one holding, and just all of those things that you tend to think of as being outside of the typical investment portfolio that somebody just ought to be thinking about when they're presented with the possibility of putting some of their assets in their portfolio in its broadest sense.
John, thank you for that. And I love the way you kind of parse through that. That's excellent. Outside of what Omar said, this does come back to some fundamental things. And for me, the first thing is, how well do you understand it? When we first, everybody's talking about crypto now, but these conversations started a while ago, 3-4 years out, depending on, what people were focused on. But, it's always how much do you understand? And you need to start there, whether it's crypto, it's various individual stocks, or we're talking about real estate in particular, because everybody lives in a home, whether they rent it or own it, and they feel like they truly understand this. And once you get out there, you'll learn you don't know everything. So I caution people to always start with that fundamental thing. How well do you know it? And what you really need to do is to really learn everything about it. I came late, to real estate investing directly. And it was because as a younger person, I was much more risk averse. But what I like about me doing it, I really waited until I had a lot of knowledge. I didn't have the hands-on experience, and that will elevate your knowledge too. In a different forum, we could talk about that. But I think that is critical. very critical to take the time to really learn. And I don't mean doing it on a surface level. As we talk about real estate, I've probably read over 50 books, from the very basic to the much more complex in terms of real estate investment trusts and things like that. I mean, really understanding them at a very technical knowledge basis.
And it helps you in more ways than one. You talked earlier about the importance of paying for expertise, but the more you know, the more intelligent questions you can ask of your expert, your paid experts, right?
Great
so that
point.
you at least understand your situation, right? So
No.
it's good for everybody all around. And I think it's very nice when you're an expert in something and someone comes to you with a lot more knowledge, right? It's a little bit easier to help. We have a handful of questions that are focused just more on budgeting broadly, and among them, is there a particular tool, or whether it's an app or whatever platform, website, whatever, sort of an Excel template of sorts, right? How should people be thinking about managing their budget overall, expenditures, savings, and hopefully seeing some things that may not be obvious when you're focused on just the cash flow through your accounts on any given unit of time?
So I would say, there's a lot of tools out there. Speaking on my own personal experience, I've gone from building out a spreadsheet for balancing my checkbook, to using sites such as personalcapital.com, which helps you aggregate all of your different accounts from varying institutions, to what my bank has to offer. If I do a lot of purchasing using my debit card, for example, those get flagged, and I find there's, where I bank in particular, there's extremely good reporting that comes out of that, where I can see on a month-to-month basis, they already do all this categorization for me, where I'll be able to see, okay, I spent X amount last month on groceries, and that's 10% more than what I spent the prior 2 months. Well, why? I could start drilling into that and start seeing at broad categories, and being able to go into more levels of detail into that. There's a lot of great options out there. I'd say, first off, start to see with your local bank. Log on to the website or onto the app and see on the budgeting side what's available there. And if that's something that works well for you, then wonderful. If not, there are some really good websites out there that allow you to aggregate from multiple sources.
Eric, anything you wanted to add there before I jump on? I couldn't tell if you were about to speak. I'm sorry.
Omar read my mind. I really love where he is. Keep it simple. The local banks do a lot, especially if they're large, in terms of that categorization that he mentioned, because I was going to say that. The only thing I would add is, many people are fearful of the whole budgeting discussion. I would say be kind to yourself and start with a flexible mindset. So set a budget, give yourself 3 or 4 months, see how it goes. I think that you should view it as a very much more dynamic process than locked in. So that's going to require some flexibility. And if you're doing it with more than yourself, I think really take that point to heart, that this is going to be an ongoing process where maybe you're starting at one point, but through negotiations, you're going to have to create some other flexibilities and things like that.
Somebody asked a specific question about budget allocation for things such as insurance, specifically health insurance. But more broadly speaking, we hear these ideal averages thrown out there that, you want about this much or no more than this much of your monthly expenses going to housing, right? A certain amount for insurance and other healthcare, a certain amount to be saving, investing, spending on whatever. Obviously, a lot of that varies based on a lot of factors. Certainly, I mean, if you're living in a high cost of living market, a New York City or San Francisco, that some of those percentages look very different. But are there ranges or guidelines that maybe people are less familiar with that we should all be thinking about from a budgetary standpoint and evaluating where we are?
I'm not a fan of a lot of these kind of rules of thumb. And you said it so well, Jada. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, different people come with different resources, different salary ranges, and my goodness, depending upon where you live, you won't fit in some of these boxes. So I say, try to narrow it very specifically for where you are geographically. Look at the income ranges for some of these things that come out if you're trying to fit into the stats.
And averages are just that, they're averages, right? I mean, you're a discrete variable as opposed to an average. So it only does so well. Yeah. Omar, you were going to say something?
Yeah, one other thing I'll add in. So Eric brought up a great point early on around emergency funds. And there's always a debate on that, is how many months worth of expenses should you have in an emergency fund? If you Google it right now, probably the first result you'll see is 6 months. Okay, well, the 6 months makes sense for your individual circumstance. Well, we don't know. I have some clients that keep 2 years worth, some keep 3 months worth, and everything in between. It depends on do you have stable, repeatable income coming in every month, or is it variable? How much of your expenses are fixed versus variable? How much known versus unknown is out there on a given month? That'll help dictate on how much can you have spent towards a mortgage or your rent or your insurance premiums versus how many months of emergency funds do you need to keep in a liquid account to keep in reserves as those rainy day funds.
And sort of related to that, somebody actually asked something that's in that domain, but is it ever okay to be making a life decision where you might move a little backwards as opposed to forward, right? Sometimes those situations they're forced on us, so there is no decision to be made. But if I don't know, maybe I want to make a career shift, right? A pivot of some kind, and that's going to mean taking a step back in order to go forward, or in order to be closer to family, I might move to a higher cost of living area, or any one of a number of things that choices we might make. The choice, if you have the choice, to stay at home with the kids for whatever period of time, or should we, because things are so unknown, should we generally just be, I don't know, trying to march forward and upward as much as we possibly can?
I like where you are. I mean, at the end of the day, it's already been said, there is no ideal situation. So people need to be flexible about their goals. Omar said that early on. This is all about what are your goals for your family and how you negotiate that. Yeah, that's all I'll say on that.
And I'll say, we try to make decisions that help, for the long term. If I personally, there's been a circumstance where I temporarily took a pay cut to change jobs, but over the long term, it brought me to where I wanted to be long term. So sometimes, same goes for sometimes, it's not always just a linear progression. As long as it's going to get you long term to where you want to be, those are the right steps to make. And in my own personal experience as well is, sometimes you need to strike that balance. There's that balance between maximizing your compensation versus your happiness, or that work-life balance. You have to figure out what's most important for you, and try to make decisions based off of that.
In that regard, your work is a lot like mine. We can give a lot of advice, but the truth is, we all value different things and place different weights on different things. And at the end of the day, it's personal decision making. But it is good when people take the time to ask. There's a great question here that comes up for a lot of folks as they move through their career. I mean, it's true that no longer do we stay with one employer, but it's even in just the last 10 to 15 years, the frequency with which we change employers has increased. It's not uncommon now for people to jump every 2 to 3 years, when not all that long ago, at least 5 to 7 was kind of considered a good stretch. And for a lot of folks, that means that they have investment vehicles, depending on who their employer partners with for retirement planning and whatnot, in a lot of different institutions. Is it wise and is there a benefit to keeping that kind of diversification with regard to your assets? Or should they be thinking about rolling all of that together under one umbrella? And if there's no one easy answer, which I'm guessing there isn't, what are the considerations?
Yeah, where you ended is, I think, the most important. There's so many things that we don't know, but you need to go through and look at what's the range of investment options, what's the cost of those options, what's the performance, what's the flexibility? Does it allow you potentially, if someone needed lifetime income, to have that there? Also, does this increase the complexity of your life? And by consolidating that, would that make your life much more simple? Also, in this discussion, especially for couples, think about, you're the one in charge. You're the CFO of your house. What if something happens to you? I don't think people do enough thought there. If COVID has done anything, is to let you know crazy things that you haven't planned for might happen. And in that, you want to do this with a mindset that you don't make things too complex for the other people in your household. They're not going to like you if you're not around anymore.
I echo that sentiment that you want to try to simplify your financial lives as much as it makes sense to. If you have, let's say, 401ks from 10 different firms and you need to start taking distributions on those at age 72, you're going to have quite a heck of a exercise you're going to have to do on a yearly basis to make sure that you're keeping track of all these. Otherwise, you're going to get hit with a hefty penalty from the IRS. So I'd say something around frequent job changes. I call it good housekeeping. I don't think it's a particularly good practice to keep old 401ks dormant, because for one thing is you can't contribute into those 401ks. You can only contribute into where your current employer is. Number two is you only have a limited number of investment options in your 401k or your 403b. With an IRA, you have it's a much higher amount of options to be able to invest in. So I find it a good practice is either you roll all those 401ks into an IRA or Roth, depending on the circumstance, or you roll that into your current employer's 401k, as only so you could simplify your life. And also, if you decide to do it in an IRA, then you at least have a lot more investment options at your disposal.
Where should somebody start if they're just completely new to all of this? I mean, there are a couple of folks who've indicated that, while we've kept it really, really broad, these aren't necessarily all terms that people are familiar with or have been exposed to. And we talk about looking for help, right? But there's also just that, what Eric was talking about, kind of educating yourself a little bit. Where on earth does somebody begin when all of this is either just seemingly very, very foreign or intimidating? I mean, where's the go square on the board?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of there's more resources than we can count on online for looking up. I think you have to be careful with sometimes there's more misinformation than information, and if you're not as knowledgeable on the subject, you may not be able to distinguish between the two. So I would caution with looking at certain sources. I'd say start off with every institution, especially in Wall Street institutions, publish research. Some are very broad and kind of go into what kind of at a high level what's happening in the markets on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. Major publications, the Wall Street Journal has always been, when I was in school, and even now is still an excellent resource. Bloomberg, but something even like Investopedia, it's a good starting point to be able to have to at least if you need to look at those fundamentals, like what's the difference between a traditional versus a Roth IRA, for example. If you don't know, well, that's something really important for you to be able to know and to understand, and you can look that up and educate yourself, or you have that discussion with somebody, with a professional, to see does it make more sense to invest in one versus the other. But there's a lot of information out there. It's difficult to be able to parse through so much of it and to figure out what is really, what would be beneficial versus not for you.
Right. We've got through most of the questions. If there are any remaining questions, I'm going to encourage people who are still online with us to get those in there, because we're going to start winding this up and turning this back over to the staff for some final announcements and so forth. But as far as questions that I was still going to throw at you, what about looking at this from a different angle? And that, given this is my space, from a career perspective, right? I mean, the industry has, as we've said so many times, it's changed so much, and there are a lot of different paths. From your side of the desk, what are things about the space that are maybe different, or misperceptions that people may be holding about thinking about either getting into financial services, various areas of financial services? It's not the same game that it was when I got out of business school, and certainly out of undergrad.
Yeah, no, you're so correct, John. The industry has changed tremendously. If we go back to when I was coming out of school in the late 80s, this would have been a profession that was really product centric in terms of trying to get clients to. Now it's more holistic and looking at planning and those aspects. And even for the people who may be interested in career changes, this used to be a profession where you had to come in, and if you weren't able to kind of grow the business quickly, people would joke and say you're going to starve because you won't have any income. So the industry's changed and gotten smarter and realized they need to support people better in those early years to grow their business. And they've structured it so that it's much more helpful. You can come into teams. There's just a lot of better things going on with the industry. So great point.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that is, when I was in business school and trying to crack into financial services, and I started first in the investment banking world, I was told you have to be from a certain school to get in. And that is total nonsense. So, I was told time and time and again that unless you went to Harvard or Columbia, that you wouldn't be able to get in. That's, anybody can get into this industry. You have to have the drive and the determination to do so. So it's certainly doable for anybody out there who has a desire. I love this industry. I've worked in other industries, obviously, before this. What I love so much about this industry is you're surrounded always by so many driven people, so many intelligent people, and I feel you're a product of your environment. And so that's why I love being in this. And that I've been in this industry now for 14 years, and I'm going to be in this industry for another 30 probably, because I love being around this environment.
One last question that is, it's not my most graceful shift, but I think it's an important question. So I'm just going to pivot real fast. At what point do you're ready to acquire a next big asset? In this case, the question's been framed in the form of a second home or a vacation home, but it can apply to certainly, other things as well, right? For some of us, it's motorcycles. For some people, it may be an RV. For some others, it's, I don't know, any one of a number of different things. How do you know that you're in a place where you can start responsibly thinking about incorporating something like that that's going to be a drain on the budget, but enhance your life in other ways?
Yeah, once again, if this is an important goal for you and your family, I think you need to look at where are you overall in terms of meeting certain things. Let's go back to the short-term things that Omar and I have been speaking about. That emergency fund, I'm going to stick to that. This is fundamentally important. Before you go buy the boat, could you sustain losing your job, you and your family, particularly if you're the only breadwinner, for more than 6 months? I say that's check one. Two, where are you in terms of the assets that you might have long term? Obviously, if you're trying to buy a second home, I would hope that you've taken enough time to have built up a nice down payment. I don't think it should be just I know there are ways to do it at 10% or whatever. I think you want to make sure it's substantial, because back to the linear progression towards wealth building, there are going to be some things that happen, and so you want to set yourself up with enough cushions along the way. So you don't really want to stretch to do this, is my main point.
And those things,
The only-
when they do happen, they always tend to happen in clusters, right? Seldom one. I'm sorry, Omar. Yeah.
That's okay. No, so the only thing I'll add is, and John, you mentioned it in your introduction, is there's a misconception, I think, in budgeting that you have to strip out all the things that you enjoy, your vacations, eating out, and that's not the case. It's unrealistic to say, okay, I'm going to build this budget, and for the next 12 months, I'm never going to eat out, or I'm never going to go, enjoy myself. It's like, no, that's a part of your life, and that should be included into your budget. So you incorporate these things into the budget, and that's how you're going to be able to afford, going, if you want to do a yearly vacation, well, you incorporate that into your budget, and not just simply say, I'm never going to go on a vacation. There's nothing wrong with, everybody, we all work very hard. We earn our income, and we deserve at times to be able to enjoy parts of it, and that should be included in the planning process.
John, if I might, I'd like to highlight Omar's point. I love it. One of the other places I think that people should remember this, sometimes people are fortunate enough to come into money they didn't have, be it a bonus or whatever. Back to his point, we're human beings. We need to have some level of fun. I think the goal is to do it responsibly. So if you come into money you've never had before, to take a part of it, and I won't even define what I think that should be, to have some fun is smart. But then to take the rest and do smart things like paying down debt or securing your long-term future. So Omar, thank you for bringing that up, because I totally agree with that philosophy. I try to remind people of that very often.
Yeah, I am not in your line of work, but as somebody who had several family members pass away a lot younger than I am now, I learned the importance of living for both today and planning for tomorrow. You can, I hate false choices. There can be an either or, but you do have to make some choices about how you're going to balance things and where. For me, one of the most important things was travel, and kind of exotic travel. It tends to cost a lot more than just, your typical family vacation, but that meant resourcing that from other places. And I don't regret that choice at all. And it's one I would keep making. But I think it sounds like, just the importance of not being afraid of that financial conversation, that budget conversation, and especially if you are in a relationship, if you're married, a super important conversation to have. Couples, I think, are very uncomfortable just in the privacy of their own home having these conversations, let alone talking with an outside expert. And avoidance is probably not the right answer. So any closing thoughts, anything that we haven't asked that we should have asked before we turn this back to Kate?
The one thing that I'd like to mention, since we have people from such a broad, a broad age group, is especially for those that are in school or recently graduated, is to try to start putting money aside as early as possible. This idea of compounded returns is such a powerful concept that it makes such a huge difference if you're able to start investing at age 25 versus 35 versus 45. The math is very clear that it's not a linear progression, that it'll make such a huge difference the earlier you could start. I have one client, we set up for her daughter, who's 19 years old and in college, a Roth IRA. And that's going to make all the difference in her life, if she's consistently contributing into that starting at age 19 with whatever earned income she has. So, really, whenever you can, you always just try to start as early as you can with investing. Eric also mentioned around estate planning. People don't think that you need to be of a certain age before you get a will. Well, no, after I bought my first home, I was 31. My dad called me up, said, congratulations, he said, but you need a will. Like you're way overdue for one. So
It's real, really fast.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was absolutely right. We don't like to talk about these, to such subjects, but some of these things are so important. Don't think you have to wait a certain age to be able to do it. These are all available to you regardless of your age.
Eric, anything we missed or failed to ask?
I think it was a great session. I really enjoyed it. And I just want to leave people one last thought. Caution into the advice and information you get from friends and relatives. one thing I want to caution to you to remember, they never fully reveal their total situation. And also sometimes you have not done that for them. So their advice may not be as valuable as you might think.
Even if incredibly well intended, yeah, you're right. There's blind spots there. Another reason to go to a pro. Eric, Omar, thank you so much. You have clients who need you. There's a lot going on right now, which I'm sure has made the two of you busier than usual, but we're also grateful for your expertise and your time. And Kate, I'm going to turn this over to you for final announcements and closeout.
Thanks so much, John. And thanks so much for helping guide our conversation today. I know I found this incredibly useful. Omar, Eric, thank you so much for really helping us tackle this. It's a broad conversation. We could have gone on for days if we went down some of these a little bit more specifically, but I hope what the audience found is what we found, which is, talking about these things and preparing them earlier and getting really, really sort of comfortable in these spaces is huge and crucial. So thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today and sharing your expertise. And we love to see, our Husky alumni chatting with the rest of our UConn Nation. So for those of you who joined us, thank you. And thank you so much for all of your thoughtful questions that helped us sort of formulate this conversation. Just as a reminder, this was recorded today. So if you missed any portion of it or just want to go back, go ahead. You can find that on our YouTube channel. We'll also be sending out some follow-up for you. And then finally, don't forget to check out the rest of the events for the rest of our Elevate a month. We have some really fantastic programs, 5 more coming down the pike in the next few weeks. So please feel free to check that out. And in the meantime, thank you to our panelists again. And thank you for all of us joining. Stay well.